October 11, 1942, 22:33 hours, Iron Bottom Sound. The sea is black glass. No moon, no horizon, just the slow, oily heave of water sliding past steel hulls. On the bridge of USS Helena, Lieutenant Commander William J. Brockman leans over the radar scope, the green glow painting his face a sickly pale. The air smells of sweat, coffee, ozone. Somewhere below, a boiler thumps. A deck plate vibrates underfoot. Then there. A faint bloom on the screen. Not light, not sound, a presence. Contact bearing 310. The words are calm, almost bored. But every man on the bridge feels it, the tightening in the chest, the prickle at the base of the spine. Because outside, beyond the rail, there is nothing. No silhouettes, no wakes, no muzzle flashes, just darkness. And yet the radar says someone is out there. Across the water, barely visible against the night, Japanese warships cut through iron bottom sound in disciplined columns, destroyers first, then cruisers. Officers stand at their bridges, binoculars raised, eyes straining, not because they are afraid of the dark, but because they trust it. They have trained for this. Years of night maneuvers. Countless hours learning to read starlight on waves, phosphorescence in wakes, the faint shadow of a mast against a darker sky. This is where the Imperial Japanese Navy believes it is untouchable. You can almost hear the quiet confidence on those bridges, the unspoken thought, Americans are blind at night. And until very recently, that belief had been justified. Only 2 months earlier, in these same waters, Japanese cruisers had torn through Allied ships at Savo Island, annihilating them in a night action so one-sided it bordered on humiliation. Allied lookouts never saw them coming. Searchlights flared too late. Guns fired blindly. By dawn, the sea was littered with burning wrecks, and soon bodies. The lesson, at least from the Japanese perspective, was obvious. Technology could not replace the human eye. In wardrooms from Rabaul to Truk, radar was dismissed as an American crutch, a machine for sailors who lacked instinct. Japanese doctrine prized the trained observer, the officer who could judge distance by splash height, identify a ship by silhouette alone, sense an enemy through darkness like a hunter in forest shadow. Optics, discipline, spirit. That was how night battles were won. Now, as the Japanese task force advances toward Guadalcanal, they believe they are stepping once more into familiar territory. The mission is routine. Bombard Henderson Field, disrupt American air power, vanish before dawn. A well-rehearsed dance. The sea belongs to them at night. But on USS Helena, the radar scope tells a different story. Another contact appears, then another, brightening, spreading, forming a line. Brockman's finger traces the arc. These aren't ghosts, they're ships, big ones. Multiple targets, he says, range decreasing. Captain Gilbert C. Hoover steps closer, eyes flicking between the screen and the void outside the bridge windows. He has binoculars too. Everyone does. But for the first time, they feel like relics, ceremonial objects from an older war. Because the radar doesn't care about darkness. It doesn't care about fog or glare or tired eyes. It sends its pulse out into the night and listens. And what comes back is certainty. Below decks in the plotting room, sailors move grease pencils across boards. Bearings, speeds, angles, the geometry of death taking shape in clean, unemotional lines. This is not guesswork. This is not intuition. This is detection. On the Japanese flagship, officers scan the horizon. Nothing. The night remains obediently empty. No searchlights cut the dark. No starshells burst overhead. American ships, if they are there at all, are behaving strangely, too quiet, too still. One officer lowers his binoculars and allows himself a thin smile. They still don't know how to fight at night. What he cannot see, what no human eye can see, is that his formation has already been measured, ranged, sorted, that American guns are being trained not on shapes but on coordinates, that fire control solutions are being calculated against targets that exist, for now, only as glowing marks on a screen. On USS Boise, a young fire controlman whispers to no one in particular, "They're right there." It feels unnatural, almost wrong, to prepare to fire at something invisible. Every instinct says you should wait until you see the enemy, until a mast breaks the horizon, until a flash betrays a gun. But the orders are clear. Trust the radar. The Japanese column continues forward, unaware that the rules of night combat have just changed beneath their feet, unaware that their mastery of darkness, so carefully honed, so proudly defended, is about to be turned against them. On the Helena's bridge, the range ticks down. 12,000 yards. 10,000. The contacts burn brighter on the scope. Captain Hoover looks up, out into the Black Sea, then back to the glowing screen. For a brief moment, two eras of naval warfare overlap, the old and the new, the eye and the machine. He opens his mouth to give the order. And in that instant, somewhere in the dark ahead, an entire fleet sails calmly toward its own erasure. The order comes quietly. Commence firing. On USS Helena, the first salvo leaves the barrels with a concussion that punches the knight in the chest. The deck shudders. Hot cordite floods the air. Twin 6-inch guns flash, not as wild bursts of light but as disciplined, synchronized pulses. Orange flame briefly reveals steel, rigging, faces frozen in concentration. And then the darkness swallows it all again. Across Iron Bottom Sound, Japanese officers flinch, not because they see the Americans, but because they suddenly hear them. Shells howl overhead with a sound no sailor ever forgets, a tearing scream that grows impossibly loud in the final seconds. The first rounds land short. Then the next bracket tightens. Then steel meets steel. A shell slams into the forward superstructure of IJN Furutaka, detonating with a metallic shriek. Shrapnel scythes across the bridge. An officer collapses without a sound, binoculars still clutched in his hands. Another blast follows, then another, too fast, too accurate. Someone shouts, "Searchlights!" White beams stab into the night, desperate fingers clawing for shapes. They find nothing, only empty sea and drifting smoke. The American ships remain unseen, firing from invisibility like ghosts with guns. On Japanese bridges, confusion spreads like a fever. How are they ranging us? From where? Are there submarines? No one has an answer. The American cruisers and destroyers are firing by numbers alone. Radar bearings feed directly into fire control computers. Gun directors elevate and traverse automatically, slewing barrels toward enemies the crew cannot see, but the machines know are there. Another salvo. This time, IJN Yaba takes a hit amidships. The impact ruptures fuel lines. Flames leap skyward, turning the cruiser into a sudden, blazing landmark. Ironically, it is the Japanese ship, now burning, that becomes the most visible thing in the night. And visibility is no longer an advantage. On USS San Francisco, Rear Admiral Norman Scott grips the rail as reports flood in. Hits confirmed. Multiple targets damaged. His voice remains steady, but his mind races. This is working. Not the cautious probing fire he had feared, but a controlled execution unfolding in darkness. The Japanese, masters of night fighting, are being dismantled piece by piece before they can even locate their attackers. Still, the enemy is not helpless. Japanese destroyers swing out, launching Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes, deadly weapons with enormous range and explosive power. They slip silently through the water, leaving almost no wake. Invisible killers aimed at where the Americans should be. But radar changes that equation too. American operators watch faint blips streak across their scopes, fast, low, unnatural. Torpedoes in the water. Helmsmen spin their wheels. Ships heel sharply, engines roaring as formations twist and scatter. A torpedo passes close enough to rattle hull plates, its warhead sliding by unseen, unheard, then gone. The Japanese had relied on surprise. Instead, they have been revealed. On IJN Fubuki, a destroyer already under fire, the captain tries to bring his guns to bear. He squints into the darkness, waiting for a muzzle flash, a silhouette, anything. Nothing comes. The enemy refuses to appear. Then another shell punches through the hull, exploding in the engine room. Lights die, steam screams. The ship begins to lose way. For the first time, Japanese officers confront a terrifying possibility. Not just that they are losing the battle, but that they don't understand how they are losing it. This isn't bad luck. This isn't inferior gunnery. This is something else. On American ships, the mood is tense but focused. There is no cheering, no celebration. The crews work like men inside a machine, loading, firing, adjusting, checking scopes. Radar operators call out ranges with the calm precision of accountants reading figures. Target bearing 285, range 9,000. Acknowledged, guns adjust, fire. Hit. Every successful salvo deepens the same uneasy thought in Japanese minds. We are being hunted. Admiral Aritomo Godo, commanding the Japanese force, stands on the bridge of Yaba as chaos erupts around him. He had believed, truly believed, that American radar was unreliable, crude, easily fooled, that optics and training would always prevail. Now flames lick at his ship, men scream below decks, and shells keep coming from nowhere. He never sees the Americans. He never sees the ships that are killing him. All he sees is darkness and fire. As the battle grinds on, Japanese formations fracture, orders conflict, destroyers maneuver independently, cruisers slow or burn. The disciplined night choreography dissolves into individual survival. And beneath it all, something deeper begins to crack. Doctrine, confidence, faith. The Imperial Japanese Navy had built its identity around the idea that war at night belonged to them, that darkness was their ally, their shield, their weapon. Tonight, darkness has turned traitor. On USS Helena, the radar scope still glows, steady and indifferent. Contacts fade as ships slow, burn, or sink. New echoes appear, confused, scattered, no longer forming clean lines. The Americans are no longer reacting. They are controlling the fight. And somewhere in the smoke and fire of Iron Bottom Sound, the Japanese Navy begins to understand, not fully yet, but enough to feel the chill, that this is not just a lost engagement. It is the end of an era. Iron Bottom Sound is no longer dark. It flickers orange, white, sickly yellow as burning ships punch holes in the night. Smoke drifts low over the water, stinging eyes, coating tongues with ash and fuel oil. The sea itself seems wounded, rippling around wreckage and debris. For the Japanese, this is supposed to be impossible. On the shattered bridge of IJN Yaba, Admiral Aritomo Godo lies mortally wounded, his uniform soaked dark. Officers cluster around him, shouting orders that arrive too late or go unheard. Communications are failing. Runners stumble through smoke-filled corridors. Somewhere below, a magazine fire rages, barely contained. No one can explain what went wrong. They had approached in perfect order, speed disciplined, lookouts sharp. The night had been theirs until, without warning, American shells began landing with uncanny precision. Not probing fire, not ranging shots. Direct hits. A junior officer, his face smeared with soot, blurts out the thought others are afraid to voice. They're using radar directly into their guns. The word hangs in the air. Radar. For years, Japanese naval doctrine had treated it as a novelty, unreliable, power-hungry, dependent on fragile electronics. Something useful for navigation, perhaps, but not combat, not decisive combat. The real weapon, they believed, was training, the human eye sharpened by relentless night exercises. Now that belief is bleeding out on the deck. On American ships, the picture is very different. The confusion they had expected, misidentifications, overlapping fire, hesitation, is not materializing. Instead, information flows cleanly from radar rooms to plotting tables to gun directors. The chain holds. On USS San Francisco, Admiral Norman Scott listens as reports stack up. Enemy cruiser heavily damaged, another possibly sinking, destroyers scattering. Still, he knows the danger isn't over. Radar gives vision, but it does not make one invulnerable. Japanese torpedoes are still in the water. Somewhere in the blackness, destroyers may yet find a firing position. One lucky hit could erase all advantage. The Americans maneuver constantly, zigzagging, altering speed. It feels unnatural, fighting without seeing, trusting a glowing screen more than one's own eyes. Some officers still glance out into the darkness, half expecting reality to contradict the machines. It never does. On the Japanese destroyer Fubuki, the bridge is a ruin. Steering is gone, fire spread unchecked. The captain orders abandon ship, his voice steady even as the deck lists beneath his feet. Sailors slide down ropes into oil-slick water, disappearing into the dark. They never saw who killed them. This is the cruelest part. Naval combat has always had a face, an enemy silhouette, a searchlight glare, the flash of guns. Even at night, there was usually a moment of recognition, a shared understanding between hunter and hunted. Radar erases that. For the Japanese survivors, the Americans might as well be invisible gods, striking from beyond human perception. And that realization spreads fast. On ships still capable of fighting, captains begin to hesitate. They slow. They maneuver defensively. Aggression, the very trait Japanese night doctrine prized above all, fades under uncertainty. You cannot charge what you cannot find. By the time the firing slackens, the outcome is clear. The Japanese force withdraws, battered and disorganized, leaving burning hulks behind. American ships, though not unscathed, remain in control of the field. As dawn approaches, pale gray light creeps over Iron Bottom Sound. Smoke lifts. The scale of the damage emerges. Twisted metal, lifeboats adrift, oil fires still smoldering on the water's surface. Only now do the Americans finally see what they have been shooting at. It is sobering. On Guadalcanal, this battle will soon be catalogued, named, dissected. The Battle of Cape Esperance, some will call it. A victory, a morale boost, proof that the Japanese can be beaten at night. But inside the Imperial Japanese Navy, the impact cuts deeper than losses or hull damage. It strikes at identity. For decades, Japanese officers had been taught that spiritual superiority and sensory mastery could overcome industrial disadvantage, that careful training could negate mass production, that skill could outmatch machines. Radar disproves that in a single night. And worse, it does so publicly. Word spreads quickly through Japanese naval circles, whispered at first, then argued, then reluctantly accepted. American ships are fighting blind and winning. Still, the lesson is not fully learned. Some commanders insist Cape Esperance was an anomaly, poor coordination, bad luck, a failure of execution, not doctrine. They point to Savo Island, to earlier victories, to the belief that once Americans are forced into close-range chaos, their machines will fail them. They will get their chance to test that belief. Soon. Because even as Japanese confidence fractures, American radar technology is improving. Faster sweep rates, clearer displays, better integration with fire control. Crews are training harder, trusting the screens more deeply, learning to think in bearings and ranges rather than silhouettes. The night is no longer a barrier. It is a weapon. And in the waters around Guadalcanal, more fleets will enter darkness believing they understand it, only to discover that darkness now belongs to something they cannot see. The next encounter will be bigger, bloodier, and impossible to ignore. November 12, 1942, 01:24 hours, off Guadalcanal. The rain comes down in sheets, warm and relentless, drumming against steel decks and blurring what little starlight remains. The sea is restless now, chopped by wind and wake. Thunder mutters somewhere beyond the horizon. On the bridge of USS Washington, Captain Glenn B. Davis watches the radar repeater with an intensity that borders on reverence. The green sweep rotates, once, twice, 3 times. Then it lights up. A solid return, big, moving fast. Battleship-sized. You can almost feel the collective intake of breath across the bridge. This is no cruiser raid, no probing force. This is something heavier, something meant to decide the campaign. Behind the Americans, Henderson Field burns intermittently, Japanese shells from earlier bombardments still smoldering in the jungle. Ahead, invisible in the rain and darkness, lies the Imperial Japanese Navy's answer to radar, raw firepower. The battleship Kirishima is out there. Her crew doesn't know it yet, but she has already been found. American doctrine has changed since Cape Esperance. Not officially, not yet in manuals or lectures, but in practice, in instinct. Radar is no longer a supplement. It is the backbone of night combat. Orders are shorter now, voices calmer, everyone knows their role. On USS Washington, radar ranges feed directly into the main battery fire control system. Plotting teams update solutions in real time. The ship's massive 16-inch guns, each shell weighing as much as a small car, begin to elevate. No one can see the enemy. No one needs to. On the Japanese side, confidence still lingers. Admiral Nobutake Kondo aboard Kirishima believes he has drawn the Americans into a decisive night action. He expects chaos, confusion, flashing searchlights. The Americans, he assumes, will stumble as they always have once things grow close and violent. Japanese optics strain into the rain. Lookouts peer through binoculars streaked with water. Occasionally, a shadow seems to move, but nothing firm enough to fire upon. Then the Americans fire first. The opening salvo from USS Washington is not dramatic. There is no searchlight flare, no warning burst into the sky. Just an earth-shaking concussion as the guns speak, followed seconds later by distant impacts. The first shells miss. The second straddle. The third hits. A 16-inch shell slams into Kirishima's forward superstructure, detonating with a violence that tears steel apart like paper. Another punches through the engine spaces, flooding compartments and killing men instantly. A third obliterates a secondary turret, hurling bodies into the rain. On Kirishima's bridge, the shock is total. They have been hit by something they cannot see. Damage reports flood in, overlapping, contradictory, steering compromised, fires spreading, power fluctuating, and still no clear sighting of the American battleship responsible. Searchlights snap on, stabbing wildly through rain and smoke. They illuminate nothing. The Americans are doing something no Navy has ever done before. They are fighting a battleship duel at night, without visual contact. On USS Washington, radar operators call out calm updates. Target slowing. Target course erratic. Range closing. Captain Davis gives the order to continue firing. Another salvo. More hits. Each impact strips away Japanese certainty. The Kirishima's crew had trained endlessly for night combat, had practiced optical ranging, starshell illumination, coordinated maneuvers. None of it matters when the enemy never appears. This isn't a duel. It's an execution. Admiral Kondo finally understands what is happening, but understanding does not bring solutions. His ships are being tracked continuously, their movements predicted seconds before they occur. Every attempt to maneuver simply feeds new data into American fire control. Human skill cannot outrun mathematics. After minutes that feel like hours, Kirishima begins to list badly. Flooding spreads, engines falter. The proud battleship, veteran of Pearl Harbor, is dying in darkness. The order comes at last. Abandon ship. Sailors scramble into the rain, leaping into black water as explosions ripple behind them. The sea closes over the wounded battleship, claiming her silently, without ceremony. When dawn breaks, the scale of the disaster becomes undeniable. Another Japanese capital ship lost, not to surprise torpedoes, not to daylight air attack, but to radar-directed gunfire in total darkness. There is no way to explain this away. Back in Japanese headquarters, reports are read in stunned silence. Optics failed. Night training failed. Courage failed, not because the sailors lacked it, but because courage cannot see through rain and darkness the way radio waves can. The Imperial Japanese Navy is now facing a brutal truth. The Americans are learning faster. Each engagement sharpens their methods. Each radar screen builds confidence. Crews no longer fear the night, they exploit it. Darkness, once the Japanese sanctuary, has become an American hunting ground. And still, Japanese commanders debate. Some argue for improved radar of their own. Others insist doctrine must adapt. A few cling stubbornly to the belief that spirit and aggression can still overcome machines. But time is running out. Because in the months ahead, radar will not just guide guns. It will guide ambushes, interceptions, entire fleets moving unseen across vast stretches of ocean. And the Japanese Navy, once supreme after sunset, will soon find that night offers no refuge at all. The ocean has learned to whisper back. And it whispers only to those who can hear it. Early 1943, Central Solomons. By now, the nights feel different. American sailors sense it even before the radar sweep begins, before the green line spins, before contacts bloom into existence. There is a confidence in the dark that hadn't been there months earlier, a quiet understanding that if something moves out there, it will be found. On Japanese ships, the same darkness presses heavier than it used to. Where once it felt like cover, it now feels like exposure. Reports from Guadalcanal ripple through the Imperial Japanese Navy like slow poison. Ships damaged without seeing the enemy. Destroyers ambushed before they can launch torpedoes. Cruisers forced to withdraw after taking precise fire from nowhere. The phrase begins to circulate in wardrooms and planning rooms alike. American radar tactics. It is spoken carefully, almost reluctantly, because acknowledging it means admitting something unthinkable, that Japan's most prized naval advantage has evaporated. On USS Fletcher, a destroyer patrolling at night, sailors barely speak as they stare at the scope. The radar operator watches contacts flicker at extreme range, small returns, fast-moving, destroyers. The so-called Tokyo Express, racing supplies and troops down the slot under cover of darkness. This had once been a Japanese specialty. Now it's a liability. Multiple bogies, the operator calls. High speed, bearing 045. The captain doesn't reach for binoculars. He doesn't ask for star shells. He orders the ship into position, coordinating silently with other American destroyers spread across miles of black ocean, linked by radio, synchronized by radar. The Japanese destroyers never realize they've been detected. They maintain speed, trusting the night, trusting their eyes, trusting tradition. The first American torpedoes slip into the water. Minutes later, explosions bloom where Japanese ships used to be. By the time survivors are pulled from the sea, if they are pulled at all, the question is no longer what happened, but how could this keep happening? The answer is painfully simple. The Americans no longer need light. Radar has flattened the battlefield. It has erased surprise and compressed reaction time. A Japanese ship is no longer dangerous because it is unseen, only because it is detected too late. In Tokyo, naval planners struggle to adapt. Japan does have radar now, but in small numbers with shorter ranges, unreliable displays, and crews barely trained to interpret them. Worse, doctrine lags technology. Radar information is not fully integrated into fire control. Commanders still trust the eye over the scope. And every night, that hesitation costs lives. On American ships, radar discipline becomes second nature. Crews learn to read subtle changes, how a blip elongates when a ship turns, how interference differs from a real contact, how sea clutter breathes while steel holds steady. It becomes instinct. You can almost feel the shift in posture. Men who once leaned forward, squinting into blackness, now lean toward glowing screens instead. The bridge grows quieter, more clinical, war by calculation. For the Japanese, the ocean itself seems to have turned against them. They are still brave, still skilled, still capable of inflicting damage, but they are fighting a war whose rules have changed without their consent and without their mastery. The psychological toll is immense. Survivors speak of being fired upon before any warning, of shells arriving without sound until impact, of never seeing the enemy, never knowing where death came from. That uncertainty corrodes morale faster than defeat. By mid-1943, the pattern is unmistakable. Night engagements increasingly favor the Americans. Japanese supply runs grow costlier. Reinforcements arrive late, or not at all. Guadalcanal, once contested in darkness, is now effectively sealed after sunset. And with that, something larger begins to fail. Naval power is not just ships and guns, it is belief. Belief that one's methods work. Belief that training matters. Belief that tomorrow's battle can be won. Radar steals that belief. Because it suggests something horrifying, that no amount of courage can overcome being seen first and shot first. In one after-action report, a Japanese officer writes simply, "We were defeated before we knew the battle had begun." That sentence spreads quietly, unpublicized but devastating. Meanwhile, American commanders look ahead. Radar is being installed on more ships. New models offer longer range, better resolution. Night fighting doctrine is rewritten in real time, shaped by success rather than theory. The ocean, once a place of mystery, is becoming mapped, measured in miles, seconds, degrees. And somewhere in the darkness, fewer Japanese ships are willing to run it. Because the night no longer hides them. It listens, and it answers back with gunfire. What began as mock technology has become a silent executioner, one that doesn't roar or glow or announce itself. It simply watches. And when the time is right, it strikes. By late 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy no longer speaks of owning the dark. The phrase has vanished from doctrine, from speeches, from training manuals. It survives only in memory, in the stories of older officers who remember a time when night meant advantage, when the enemy could be outmaneuvered by instinct and experience alone. Now, night is just another condition, and often a dangerous one. In the Central Pacific, American task forces move after sunset with increasing boldness. Radar screens glow steadily across bridges and combat information centers, linking ships into nervous systems of steel and electricity. Information flows faster than human reaction ever could. Targets are found, classified, assigned, destroyed, sometimes without a single visual confirmation. For the Americans, this becomes normal. For the Japanese, it becomes fatal. Attempts to counter the radar advantage come too slowly. New sets are installed, but production lags. Training remains uneven. Worse still, institutional pride resists full acceptance. Too many commanders still believe that machines should assist judgment, not replace it. But the war has already made that choice. In one quiet engagement after another, unrecorded, unnamed Japanese ships vanish in the night. Some are sunk. Others limp away, damaged, their crews shaken by an enemy they never see. Each loss tightens the strategic vice, strangling supply lines, isolating garrisons, eroding the empire's reach. The night no longer protects movement. It exposes it. By the time of the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, the lesson is complete. Radar is everywhere, on carriers, cruisers, destroyers, even submarines. The Americans track formations at ranges unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Japanese pilots and sailors operate under constant electronic surveillance, their every movement predicted, intercepted, neutralized. The Imperial Navy that once mocked radar now fights in its shadow. And it is losing. In retrospect, the tragedy is not that Japanese commanders underestimated a device, but that they underestimated a way of war. Radar was never just a machine. It was a philosophy. That information, processed faster than the enemy can think, is decisive. Night fighting had been an art. Radar turned it into science. In the end, Iron Bottom Sound lives up to its name. Wrecks rust quietly beneath the waves, scattered across the seabed, Japanese and American alike. But above them, the ocean remains dark and indifferent as it always has. What changed was not the night. It was humanity's ability to see through it. Somewhere in the Black Pacific, long after the guns have fallen silent, radio waves still race across empty water, echoing back from nothing at all. No contacts, no targets, just the quiet proof of a revolution that began the moment a radar operator trusted a glowing screen over his own eyes. The Japanese Navy never recovered its mastery of darkness. And no Navy ever would again. Because after Guadalcanal, the night stopped belonging to anyone. It became transparent.